welcome to the Election Show. I'm your host, Dr. Christina Greer. I'm an associate professor of political science at Fordham University. Joining me today, as always, via Zoom is Matt McDermott, communication strategist and vice president of Whitman Insight Strategies. And also with me is political analyst and professor of political science at Columbia University, Lincoln Mitchell. Hello, gentlemen. Happy Friday.
Another week behind us.
Another week behind us. So let's just dive right in. Matt, I'll start with you. There was supposed to be a debate this week. The organization that puts these things together decided to cancel said debate, largely due to the president's questionable health, because we can't seem to get a straight answer as to when he first became negative. We can't really get a straight answer as to when he first became positive with coronavirus. So they decided to cancel the election or cancel the debate, Freudian slip, altogether. And Joe Biden was scheduled to do a town hall on ABC on Thursday evening at 7 p.m. And lo and behold, the president decided that he too wanted to have a town hall on a competing network on NBC at the same exact time. So Matt, as a Democratic strategist, walk us through sort of the politics behind that, but then also start us off with some of your takeaways from the two different town halls.
And I guess to think about this more broadly, I mean, let's set the stage. Donald Trump is going into the second to last week of this campaign, down what appears to be substantially nationally, down in basically every swing state you look at. And he needs opportunities to turn that around. And he needs opportunities to talk to not only his hardcore base of voters, but given the record turnout we're going to see, he needs to start persuading people in the middle to transfer their vote from Biden to Trump. He just has to make up ground among the middle of America. And so you would think he would need platforms like a presidential debate to get that message out to the American people. Because he needs tens of millions of eyes on him to make a case to voters why he needs to be reelected, which is why it's so perplexing to me, at least, that he decided to back out of this debate, regardless of whether it was going to be a virtual debate or not. It obviously needed to be a virtual debate because of the president's health. I think most Americans agree with that. But by stepping out of it, it, one, prevented him the opportunity to make a clear case to the American people as to why he needs to be reelected. It also just frankly made him look weak in the minds of voters. We had new polling out this week that showed 65% of likely voters thought Trump backing out of the debate made him look weak, because most voters want to hear from these candidates and understand why they want 4 years in the White House. And so instead we had, as you mentioned, these dueling town halls, of which viewership is going to be significantly lower than you would get in a presidential debate. And it neither really changed the narrative, right? If you watched the Biden town hall, he was paced, he was steady, he was thoughtful in his responses. Based on reporting by ABC News, he actually stayed after the town hall and talked to voters for over an hour after the town hall had aired to hear their concerns, to answer their questions, to really speak with the American people about the issues that are concerning them. And if you watched NBC and the town hall that the president gave, again, nothing really changed. He was bashful, he was boastful, he was arrogant, he skirted questions around his handling of the coronavirus. He still hasn't answered questions around when he came down with coronavirus and whether he had covered up to the American people his diagnosis for a series of days around the last debate. And so neither really changed the conversation. And so for someone like Donald Trump, who's going into the last 2 weeks of this campaign behind, it's not the game changer that he needs to course correct in this campaign.
So Lincoln, I mean, what Matt has laid out, but also what Matt has sort of consistently told us over the past few months, is that it baffles him as a Democratic strategist how and why the president would choose not to expand his base. He would keep this sort of narrow 35% and not even bother to move toward the center, not even bother to try and pick up people in the middle, not even bother to try and talk about policies that would attract other people other than his steadfast members of his base. With these debates and now with these town halls, oftentimes they're not for people, as Matt has laid out, who were undecided between the two candidates. They may be undecided about whether or not they're going to abstain from voting, whether or not they're going to stay home versus go stand in long lines and actually participate. But what was gained by these two town halls this past week with Joe Biden, by all accounts, presenting detailed policies yet again about the ACA, about taxes, about sort of how he plans to lead, and Donald Trump using this as an opportunity to essentially just have a rally and try and grab some more suburban women, as he mentioned earlier in the week. Why won't you like me? Even so much as having someone in the audience ask a question, which wasn't a question, but telling the president that when he smiles, he looks so, I think it was attractive or whatever she was shooting her shot. But using that as an opportunity to, I guess, initially try and seem a little more personable. What was your takeaway from these town halls?
One thing I would point out about these town halls is that they occurred at the same time and the same night. So it wasn't like one was Monday, one was Tuesday. You could watch both and compare notes, right? They were competing against each other. So voters had to choose. Now, most voters are going to choose the candidate who they're already voting for. If you're a big Trump person, you might watch the Biden town hall just to make fun of him or laugh. And similarly, if you're a Biden person watching the Trump one, but most people go and watch their candidate. So this format was going to reach even fewer swing voters than, say, a debate would. Now, we also know that people that you do these town halls as a candidate, go back and think about the vice presidential debate is a good example of this, not to be in the moment, but because of what gets cut up and put on the video and, out in social media the next day and then the following days. I mean, I think we have to be realistic about the answer to Matt's perpetual question of which I'm interpreting as, why is Trump not reaching out to swing voters, right? And I've offered a political answer, which is he knows he can't win. He needs to mobilize his base to defend his defeat when he claims that he didn't actually lose. But there's also something else here. To ask that question suggests that you are dealing with a candidate and therefore a campaign that is capable of analytical thought, processing new information, and making information-based decisions. What Donald Trump is capable of doing is doing what makes Donald Trump happy in the moment. And what the campaign has focused from a tactical and strategic perspective far too much attention on is keeping Donald Trump happy in the moment. And when you go and watch that town hall or some of those clips of the town hall, yes, you get Donald Trump, just this bizarre sense of the world always revolves around him. And he is the aggrieved party. And yes, there are 217,000 people who are dead from coronavirus in the United States, but the media doesn't like him, right? I mean, that's the Donald Trump message. But watch closely. You also get a person whose mental capacity is declining so quickly. I mean, I don't want to say it's sad because I don't come with a wellspring of sympathy for Donald Trump. But he was talking about the rate of deaths, excess deaths in the United States. And it was very clear, because by that indicator, the numbers are much worse for Donald Trump. But it was very clear this was someone whom excess deaths in the United States was too complicated of a combination of words for him to fully understand. And not that it matters for who's going to win this election, but if we want to understand this election, we have to confront the degree that Donald Trump is just mentally unfit for office. I'm not a doctor, but whatever condition he has, he's debilitated to the point where he cannot process new ideas. Everything is about the moment. So of course he does a town hall, and of course he gets angry, and of course he thinks he does great, and his cult-like followers say he does great. That's Trump, and that's this campaign.
So I want to ask both of you this really briefly, because next week on October 22nd, a debate was supposed to take place. Lincoln, I'll start with you. Will this debate happen? So it would officially be a third debate. If it does happen, are the stakes much higher for the president because he'll have to actually perform, or does it not really matter because his sycophants will be there? Or will Joe Biden sort of have to maintain that momentum since obviously he's held to a completely different standard? But if the debate isn't held, is the model of that debate model that we've had sort of from that Nixon-Kennedy era, has Donald Trump essentially ruined yet another norm of American politics where we no longer use debates moving forward? That is, knock on wood, we have free and fair elections and transference of power in the upcoming elections.
There's a lot of points there. So I would just try to take a few of them.
First one, will the third debate happen?
I don't know. I mean, I think it was the Commission on Debates that canceled this one, not either of the campaigns. If the Commission on Debates says that we're going to move forward, then both candidates have to participate. It'd be foolish for Biden to say he can't participate. Now, the Commission on Debates has shown they're going to take health issues seriously. So if they want screens, if they want virtual, Biden should say yes no matter what. This debate is not going to matter as much And one reason is that there'll be tens of millions of votes cast by October 22nd. I mean, you talk to people all over America, they're already standing in line. I dropped my ballot, not that I'm some, symbolism of all Americans, but I mailed my ballot there. So many, many people are voting. The number of undecided swing voters, when you get to 10 days out, more or less, before an election, those who are answering undecided in a poll, and Matt knows a bit better than I do, in many cases, they're not voting on it anyway. So this is, I think this will get a lot of hype, but unless something just even more dramatic than we've seen already happens, it's not going to make a difference. This norm of debates, to get to your last question, we all think of the Kennedy-Nixon debate in 1960 as the first major presidential debate, but then we didn't really have it again until 76. So it's not like we've had them every year, but they arise out of a technological era when you saw less of the candidates and there were more undecided voters. So my sense is that Donald Trump, this may be another norm that Donald Trump has broken. If it goes away, it's because the technological environment has changed, the communication environment has changed, and the political environment has changed. There's so much more ways to get information and see the candidate today that I think debates are unnecessary in the general election. The primary is something.
And so, Matt, as my resident Democratic strategist, I'm curious to know, A, do you think a third debate will happen? And what are the stakes? And is this debate model done? And keep in mind, for our viewers at home, the debate commission canceled the debate from last week when Donald Trump said that he wouldn't participate virtually. So when you mentioned, there are different models that we could use, the president has already said, I'm not going to debate virtually. So either I'm in person, controlling the room and controlling the show, or I don't show up. So Matt, what are your thoughts on this third debate possibly on October 22nd?
So I tend to think that the last debate's going to happen in part because Donald Trump needs it to happen. He needs a game changer. He needs a moment where all eyes are on him and he can change the narrative of this race because he hasn't gotten it yet. And if there's anything we know about 2016, the Trump campaign is fueled by this idea of some last minute October surprise. And the debate really affords him probably one of the last opportunities to do that. But I tend to agree with Lincoln. I just don't think the debate will mean all that much. We already have over 23 million Americans today who have cast a ballot. Compare that back to 2016, when ahead of the third and last debate in 2016, only 2 million people have cast their ballot. So we're just seeing measurable more Americans casting their ballot early this year, which I think negates sort of the value of this last debate. And to another one of Lincoln's points, which is equally as important, there really just aren't any undecided voters left in this country anymore. You look at poll after poll, and wherein 4 years ago you had 6, 7, 8, 9% of this country still undecided heading into the final weeks of the campaign, in part because both campaigns were unliked by the average American voter. This year it's very different. Joe Biden is well regarded, well liked by a majority of this country. And so you look at polling and maybe 1, maybe 2% of voters are undecided, and there's no real third-party candidate this year to pull votes away from. So there just isn't really a large cohort of undecided voters left at this point. And so there's just not a lot that can be said or done in that final debate to really make a difference.
I get so frustrated because it seems like every 4 years we spend so much time talking to these undecideds. And I'm like, who are you? I think you're attention seekers, and I'm tired of talking to you. Let's focus on the issues, and let's focus on either the weakling partisans or people who actually, are contributing to the democracy. So Matt, I want to stick with you because we're almost halfway out of time, but I want to talk about the electoral math. And we've brought this up over the past few weeks, and there are different states that have been popping up that you've mentioned, that Lincoln's mentioned. We've brought up Arizona, we've brought up Texas, we've brought up North Carolina, and obviously Florida and Ohio and Pennsylvania. Last week we had the whole discussion about, most Americans were scratching their heads, asking why Pence and Harris were spending 10 minutes talking about fracking. Most Americans had no idea what it was. The other Americans were like, why, who cares, right? Don't we have bigger fish to fry? So we have specific states that we're focused on. Do you see the president having a path to the magic number of 270? We know to become president of the United States, based on the Constitution, you're elected by the Electoral College. You need to get over the threshold. The number is 270. Does the president have that path, looking at the state maps that you're looking at, and also looking at the Senate races that will dictate some of that hyper participation that you've alluded to, that we've already seen in the early voting?
To be blunt, it's tough, and something would have to change. So, when you look at the electoral map, there's really 2 places to look. One is sort of what you would describe as the upper Midwest, places like Wisconsin, places like Michigan, places like Pennsylvania, where, as we're all very well aware, Donald Trump eked out a victory against Hillary Clinton 4 years ago. All of those states, because of demographic changes, but also because of inroads that Joe Biden has made, all have trended towards Democrats in the last few years. You look at suburban white women, you look at non-college voters, you look at college voters. Joe Biden is just doing measurably better among those audiences than Hillary Clinton did 4 years ago. So that's one place to look. Could Donald Trump, in the last few weeks of this campaign, sort of upend the race that's been held to date and maybe win one or more of those states? Potentially. But he needs to essentially sweep those states. And then the second place you need to look is the Sun Belt, places like Arizona, places like Texas, to some extent places like North Carolina and Georgia, just given the demographics look a lot like that Sun Belt demographic. And again, Donald Trump is essentially tied in most of those states. In others like Arizona and North Carolina, Joe Biden has maintained a small but pretty sustained lead throughout this campaign. Donald Trump also needs to sweep those states. And so for Donald Trump to win this election, he needs to essentially run the table. He needs to win everything he won in 2016 and avoid losses in places like in North Carolina and in Arizona, where Hillary Clinton fell short, but Joe Biden is doing much better right now. And so that's why when you look at this sort of at that level, you start thinking to yourself, what is the path that the Trump campaign sees for themselves? Honestly, I don't know with the campaign that they're running. And then the second challenge that they really face is a money challenge. You saw in the past 24 hours, both the Biden campaign and the Trump campaign put out what their fundraising numbers look like in the past month. Joe Biden outraised Donald Trump 2-1. And that is just never a campaign that I think any of us imagined. We on the Democratic side have been fretting for years about the war chest that the Trump campaign had been building. They basically had raised $1 billion against Democrats before we even started our primary this past year. And somehow or another, Democrats stepped up and they raised well over $1 billion in the past 90 days. It's an incredible mobilization of the grassroots, and it's put Democrats in a position where they can actually compete on a map that is more expansive than anything we've seen in 30 or 40 years. So it's a tough map for the Trump campaign. I think the Biden campaign at this point is firing on all cylinders. And as I mentioned before, it just feels like something needs to change to upend that scenario.
Right, and I think the Biden campaign is hoping that they can maintain that momentum through November 3rd. I think, Matt, though, when you talk about fundraising, and obviously you know this world very well, I think what's also helped the Democrats is that the Republican Party right now seems to be filled with a lot of grifters. So they've had a lot of money, but there's been some inappropriate uses of that money, and lots of hundreds of millions of dollars just seem to have gone out of the window in places where it doesn't actually make sense to galvanize voters, right? So Lincoln, following up on quite a few of Matt's important points, when we're scratching our heads and asking, what is the path for the president? A lot of folks, political scientists like myself, say, well, the path to the presidency is theft. We're seeing rampant voter suppression across states that have early voting, right? Coincidental lines in Virginia being cut so there's no electricity. Lines around the corner, people waiting 8 and 10 hours in Texas and Georgia especially to vote. Lots of people coming prepared with food and water and chairs, but, long lines are not necessarily a sign of a robust democracy. They're a sign of voter suppression and real deliberate efforts by a lot of party leaders and secretaries of state to disenfranchise voters. We've seen lawsuits for certain counties having one ballot box where folks can drop off their ballots, right? We've seen in your home state of California, the Republican Party putting illegal ballot boxes there and having people drop in their ballots, thinking that they're dropping in an official place. That is voter fraud and it's tied up in the courts with secretaries of state. So these long lines, these fake ballots, it's highly problematic. But I want to tie in something that you said last week when I asked about sort of the coattails and the magic number. Can Trump get to 270? Can he pull all of these senators? Can he pull Lindsey Graham? Can he pull Mitch McConnell? Can he pull Susan Collins? And you said it's actually this time the opposite, right? If anything, it's going to be those senators that pull the president across the finish line. But as we look at the Senate map, Lincoln, it's not looking great for Susan Collins. It's not looking great for Lindsey Graham and the $57 million that Jamie Harrison was able to raise. I think it looks a little bit better for Mitch McConnell, but, because he's also running against a woman in the South and there are a host of things, but it's not looking fantastic. Georgia has 2 Senate seats up. Both of those candidates are doing quite well. We even saw the WNBA going against one of the Senate candidates who happens to own the team. So there's a lot of things going on that speak to the reverse coattails you mentioned last week. What do you think about 270 and this magic number?
Well, I think Matt gave you a pretty good lay of the land. One thing I would say is that Donald Trump is not a great Sun Belt candidate. You think of a state like Arizona, which has been competitive in recent years, or Texas, which has not, and now it is. Donald Trump is an old white guy from the Northeast, and that plays better in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin than in Arizona and Texas, for example, or even North Carolina. The other thing I would add, and I'll get to the Senate in a second, the other thing I would add about Arizona.
But Lincoln, can you tell us why so? Why does that not play well in the Sun Belt?
I'll get to that. 2 reasons. One, that industrial Midwest message that things used to be good, we're going to bring the jobs back, let's go back to the 1960s, that resonates with white working class voters to a great extent in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio. The story of the last century or last 40 years is very different in Arizona and Texas. It's economic growth. It's different industries. And then the other piece of it is that we've heard a lot about the Latino vote and how Biden may be underperforming relative to Hillary Clinton with Latinos. But as you move west and south, Latino vote is different, right? Latino vote is a broad umbrella that we ascribe to a lot of different people in the United States. But as you move to the west and the southwest, it becomes more Mexican American. And Mexican Americans are much stronger Democratic partisans than, for example, the groups of Latino voters in Florida, not least because of Trump's views and statements about Mexican Americans. So there, you're going to get a bigger Latino vote for Biden, and that will help. With regards to the Senate, this is going to be very close. I suspect we'll have a number of close races that could go either way. The Democrats are at 47, but they'll drop to 46 because Doug Jones will not get reelected in Alabama, unfortunately, for the Democrats. Susan Collins is going to lose to Sarah Gideon almost certainly. John Hickenlooper is drubbing Cory Gardner in Colorado, and if you've seen any of those debates, you get a sense of why. Mark Kelly is going to beat Martha McSally in Arizona. She's never won an election out there, and he's a fantastic candidate, a former astronaut, an Arizona guy. And then you've got all these other...
And husband of Kathy Giffords.
Kathy Giffords, right. And then you have all of these other races. In South Carolina, a super smart, progressive, politically skilled African-American Democrat with a real shot to take out Lindsey Graham, who is hated by so many nationally. In Alaska, a Jewish doctor is 1 point ahead, who's running as independent, but is effectively a Democrat. The races in Georgia, as you mentioned. So the Democrats don't have to win all of those other races. They have to win Maine, which they will. They have to win Colorado. They have to win Arizona. That gets them back up to 49, and then they only need to win.
And Iowa's looking pretty good after that debate, and Joni Ernst couldn't tell you the price of soybeans.
Who knows the price of a bushel of corn this morning? I certainly do.
Iowa is in the mix as well. So if they between Iowa, I think Kentucky's going to go for McConnell. I would like, as a Democrat, I'd like to see him lose. Not going to happen. Between Iowa, South Carolina, North Carolina, where Cal Cunningham has survived a sexting scandal. Anthony Weiner, if he's listening, must envy that. South Carolina, both Georgia seats, if they would 1 or 2 of those, they take the Senate. So it's pretty good. And then I would just add that there's a 1 in maybe 10 chance that Trump really pulls that inside straight and wins this thing. There's a 1 in 5 chance or greater that the levee breaks and that the Democrats really sweep.
Right. So gentlemen, I wish we had more time to discuss SCOTUS because that also is happening this week. There's so much that happens in between the 7 days that we're together. Matt, really, really briefly, I want to start with you. Amy Coney Barrett has been not writing notes, but she's been in front of the Judiciary Committee. Senator Feinstein from Lincoln's great state of California is in hot water from nonsensical questions she asked, and essentially her praising of someone who 88 professors at Notre Dame have signed an open letter saying that she is not qualified. Many of her colleagues have said she's not qualified. She is a Trump-appointed judge. She's only been a judge for 3 years. So this idea that she could possibly sit on the most powerful bench indefinitely scares a lot of people because of her views on marriage equity, because of her views on a woman's right to choose, because of what she'll probably do to the ACA. Having Black children means nothing. As I've said many times before, some of the worst professional interactions I've had are with people who have Black wives. So that doesn't matter at all. Really quickly, what are your thoughts on SCOTUS? We see Lindsey Graham pushing through votes. Where are we going to be next week?
Yeah, so the nomination is obviously moving forward. In all likelihood, it's going to get through the Senate before the election. I think Republicans need to understand the extent to which that tarnishes the court moving forward. We have new polling out this week that shows Amy Coney Barrett is the most unpopular nominee to the Supreme Court since Robert Bork. She is just not a popular person, in part because of the timing of this nomination, in part because of just her ideological perspective on what the court should look like. And by putting her on the court, they will delegitimize it for the next generation. And I think give Democrats a real incentive were they to win the Senate next year to make some fundamental and radical changes to reform the court and make it more equitable and representative of the everyday American.
And Lincoln, in 1 minute, I mean, if Amy Coney Barrett is pushed through, we'll have 4 justices who were nominated by Donald Trump and George Bush, neither of whom won the popular vote. So we also see the court not just put in by unpopular presidents and non-popularly elected presidents, but people who have really antiquated views that are actually the antithesis of the vast majority of the United States right now. Why are we talking about this promise to stack the courts, and what should the Democrats tell voters about that conversation?
Supreme Court
really briefly.
Third branch of the legislature. It's controlled by a Republican Senate that's unrepresentative, and a president who's elected by a minority. Matt is right that this delegitimizes the Supreme Court, but it also delegitimizes the Senate, and that's what Mitch McConnell has lost.
That is really an important conversation to have. Hopefully we can have it next week. That's all the time we have. Gentlemen, our 30 minutes always flies by so quickly. Thank you so much for being here with me yet again. I'm Dr. Christina Greer. If you do not have a voting plan, please make one for November 3rd. You can also look at vote.org to see if your state has early voting. Please don't just make a plan for yourself. Make one for all of your family members and the people that you know and care about. Thanks for watching the election show. Have a great one.